Welcome back to another super quick video. So I'm not actually done recording the first video that you guys will have seen, the maple box. It's actually still all clamped up here, ready to go. While that one's drying, I'm going to start up on another project, which is the other boxes that I'm going to be making. So this video is going to be a little bit of the same thing as the last one, but we're going to be using a few different woods. First box we're going to be making out of Sapele. The other one, the Walnut. So I hope you guys will stick with me. It should be pretty interesting. Again, we're dealing with some pretty cool woods. So if for no other reason, stick around to see the final product of these beautiful woods getting all nicely oiled up and that. So let's just get into it.
So the first step was checking that I was going to have enough material for both the boxes. Now, I didn't show this with the maple box, but I wanted to make sure I showed it in this one, measuring it out before I took it over to the miter saw and cut it down to size. So just like the maple box, both of these are just very rough sizes. Getting it as close as possible, but leaving enough material that if I screw up something severely, it won't overly affect the project. And so the real goal here is just getting everything as square as possible and getting our pieces milled down to the final 3/8 of an inch thickness. Now, splitting wood on the table saw like this is generally not a suggestible thing to do because it's a little bit more dangerous, but I don't have a bandsaw, so it really was my only option. One of the things that I can say about splitting wood on using a table saw is that you need to have a planer. The only way to get the saw marks off the wood is by planing it down at least a 32nd of an inch, so that's one thing to keep in mind. And so while I'm in the stage of processing all my wood, I'm going to go and do all my box lids and bottoms at the same time. And we're just going through and getting everything set up so that when we get to the point with our final pieces, we're ready to glue. Everything is perfectly square and ready to go. Now, one thing I did find while doing this is that Sapele has a very interesting smell to it. It almost has a cinnamon type smell, whereas walnut kind of smells wet. So I didn't do this for the maple box, but for this one I wanted to try and get a little bit of a cleaner cut. So I threw on one of my 60-tooth blades in hopes that the crosscuts would be just a little bit cleaner and make for a nicer finish. So as usual, I started by squaring up one edge. And with that edge square, I could cut the pieces to their final lengths and widths. Now all I'm doing here is just clamping a scrap piece of wood to the fence of my crosscut sled. And it was basically the same process for both pieces of wood. Now, if I'd planned this out a little bit better, I could have cut the long pieces at the same time because they ended up being pretty much the same length. But I was more concerned with building one box at a time and just wanted to get all the pieces cut and together one at a time rather than doing it the logical way. Then the very last piece before we got doing the joints was cutting all the pieces down to their final width. Now, each box used a different type of joint. On the Sapele box, I went for just a generic dado joint, because one of the things about Sapele is it chips and tears very easily, so I didn't really want to use finger joints on it because I thought it would be a little bit too delicate for that. And I just really wanted to try out this style of joint. For the walnut one though, I really wanted to do finger joints because they just look amazing. And this is where the secret to finger joints came in. Putting that little backer board completely got rid of all the tear out. Then for the base of these boxes, again, same thing as with the maple box, I just put a simple groove on the bottom. And then flip the piece around, cut the top groove, move my fence over a little bit, and got a perfectly fitting groove for the pieces of wood the maple chunk that you saw earlier that I'd milled down. Now, I didn't really worry too much about where the holes would be showing up because it's early boxes, it's not a big deal, and it kind of looks interesting. So, with both the boxes, with all the joints cut up, everything went together super nice in the dry fit. And so the last thing to do before final assembly was to sand everything up to 220 grit. Just making sure that there was no exposed splinters, everything was nice and soft to the touch. So once that was done, on the Sapele box I applied a little bit of glue just to where the joints would connect. And this one went together much easier than the Walnut box and was a little bit cleaner. So as you can see, everything lined up quite nicely, didn't have any major gaps, and all it took was just 4 clamps to apply nice even pressure to all the joints, making sure to not over clamp and bend the wood. And yeah, it went together nice, simple, and clean. The Walnut box was a little bit different. It was pretty much the same as the Maple box you guys saw in the last video, in that I had to go in and make sure I got glue into each and every finger, covering all sides I possibly could. And this one was a little bit more fun to assemble, just because I'd managed to tighten up my finger joints just a little bit, making sure they worked nice, they were fitting nice, a little bit nicer than on the Maple box. And with that together, I was able to clamp it up just the same and set it off to dry overnight. Once all the joints had nicely dried and were firmly in place, I ripped off the clamps and was amazed at just the beautiful joints that Walnut makes. Swapping onto a 120 belt on the belt sander, I was able to knock those fingers off real quick, getting the box all perfectly smooth to the touch on the outside. Now on the Walnut box, I opted for rounded corners, just because I think with finger joints, the rounded corners just looked way better. Whereas on the Sapele box, again, I thought the square joints would look a little bit nicer. Finally, I sanded everything up to 220 grit and on the outside and got it all nice and smooth and ready for finish. The last step was to cut the box lids, and this was kind of the most exciting part for me and the scariest. So the Sapele box went off pretty much without a hitch. I cut the 2 pieces, glued them together. Everything went together just fine. Took really no effort to do. And once the 2 pieces were glued together, I just measured the gap, cut the lid to size widthwise. Then once I had that, I could flip it over and cut it lengthwise so that it was a perfect fit to the box. And sanded it up to 220 as well for that nice smooth finish. And this time I used a spade bit to cut the hole rather than a hole saw. Made a much cleaner hole and much nicer. Now this maple lid is going to be the lid for the Walnut box, and the reason I ended up using maple for the lid for the Walnut box rather than walnut like I'd planned, because I had a few minor issues with the walnut lid that I'd put together, and it ended up exploding inside my planer. And so the final finish was all boiled linseed oil, making for just an absolutely beautiful, clean finish.
Alright guys, so both boxes are now completed. I've got the walnut one right here. I don't want to turn it too far on its side because I already went through and put all of the padding in. And this looks absolutely amazing. I honestly cannot believe how well this walnut one turned out. So now that I'm done with these boxes, I know that they seem like quite a simple project, and that's kind of, wow. They kind of seem like a simple project, but they really weren't. There was a lot of challenges dealing with a lot of different woods, so I don't have any plans for project. I've got a lot of projects in mind, but I don't have any plans ready. But I know that the next project we're going to be doing is going to be out of this maple that you see behind me, and we're going to be doing something interesting, I hope. So there are a lot of projects coming up. I've got a whole long list. I spent all last evening putting together a schedule and planning out all these videos, and now all I have to do is just design the pieces that I have kind of in my brain right now. These boxes turned out 1,000 times better than I ever could have hoped, and I'm just super ecstatic about it. So I do hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.